What really happened in that garage on a quiet night in Niterói? A respected pastor gunned down in cold blood, more than 30 bullets, and his own family under suspicion. But what secrets are they hiding? Join us as we dive deep into the shocking case that rocked Brazil. Uncover hidden motives, disturbing family dynamics, and a plot so twisted it will leave you questioning everything. Who is innocent? Who is guilty? And just how far can power, money, and ambition corrupt a family? Subscribe now to Global Crime Stories and be the first to witness the jaw-dropping details of the Anderson do Carmo murder. Each episode brings you closer to the truth. But beware, nothing is what it seems. The night of Anderson do Carmo's murder, the silence of the early morning was shattered by gunshots echoing through the streets of Pendatiba, Niterói. On June 16, 2019, Pastor Anderson do Carmo, husband of federal congresswoman and Pastor Flordelis, was brutally murdered in the garage of his own home. For the evangelical community, the news was a complete shock. Anderson and Flordelis were public figures, admired for their dedication to their faith and for adopting over 50 children throughout the years. But that night, something terrible happened. While Flordelis was entering the house, Anderson was still in the garage. Just minutes later, he was struck by more than 30 bullets, leaving him no chance of survival. The initial story suggested it was a robbery, a random crime that tragically claimed the life of a beloved man in the community. However, what investigators were about to uncover would turn the case into something much darker. The police were called quickly, and the crime scene was cordoned off. The family, in shock, couldn't understand how this could have happened. The first statements were confusing, but something in the air made the detectives uneasy. The behavior of certain family members seemed strange, and soon the investigation's focus would shift drastically. Flordelis, devastated, mourned her husband's death, but certain details began to emerge. Anderson was more than just the charismatic pastor everyone knew. He had a strong influence over Flordelis and their adopted children. This influence, according to investigators, might have been the key to what happened that night. But the most disturbing part was yet to come. The police began to explore different theories. Was it really a botched robbery? Or was there something deeper and more personal behind the brutal attack? With so many unanswered questions, one thing was clear. This would not be a simple case. What appeared to be a crime of opportunity quickly unfolded into a complex web of family intrigue, dark secrets, and conflicting relationships. But there was something more, a subtle, almost imperceptible clue that would change the course of the investigation forever. What really happened in that garage? And who was behind this crime? Stay tuned to find out what investigators uncovered in the following days and how it turned this family's life upside down. The first suspects and the family's odd behavior. Detective Antonio Ricardo Nunes was assigned to the case and arrived at Flordelis' home in the early hours of the investigation. What he found there would change the course of his career forever. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that stood out, but the unsettling behavior of some of the people involved, especially those from within the family itself. From the start, something felt off. Despite her inconsolable grief, Flordelis maintained a controlled demeanor, while the children exhibited various reactions, some oddly apathetic. Questions started to form in the investigator's mind. How could a family that preached so much about love and unity have so many layers of mystery? And why did some members seem to avoid speaking about the real dynamics inside that house? As Nunes examined the crime scene, a sense of unease crept over him. Something wasn't right, but he didn't know what it was yet. The family's initial accounts were disjointed. Some of the children suggested that Anderson had been followed for months, while others claimed he had received anonymous threats. However, none of these versions seemed to clearly align. And most intriguingly, the most sensitive details were coming from the family members themselves. If you were the investigator, what would you think? Imagine walking into a scene like this, where the facade of a perfect family begins to crumble right before your eyes. Could you keep an open mind to all possibilities? As the questions piled up, one name came up repeatedly in some of the statements: Flavio dos Santos, Flordelis' biological son. His answers were short, evasive, and his relationship with Anderson seemed strained. Nunes couldn't ignore the inconsistencies. What was really happening in this house? And what role did Flavio play in all of this? If this story has already piqued your curiosity, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any of the shocking revelations from this and other cases. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you're the first to know about our latest investigations. As the day went on, a crucial detail emerged. Lucas dos Santos, another of Flordelis' sons, had been arrested just days earlier for drug trafficking. Coincidence? Maybe. But Nunes knew that coincidences rarely explain the truth in criminal investigations. Tensions within the family were starting to surface, and what once seemed like a solid bond was now unraveling into a web of intrigue. As the first pieces of the puzzle started to come together, an unsettling truth began to form. Anderson wasn't just the victim of a brutal crime, he was part of a toxic and dangerous family plot. But there was more. A secret was about to be uncovered, one that would make everyone question Flordelis' role in Anderson's life and death. What the investigators discovered next would shock even the most seasoned detectives. Stay tuned to find out how the investigation took an unexpected turn, the first clues, and the growing mystery. As the days passed, investigators delved deeper into the complexities of the case. The first solid clue emerged when the police began looking into Anderson's behavior in the weeks leading up to his death. There was something strange about his final days, and as more details were uncovered, the sense that this was no simple robbery began to grow. Among the evidence found, a disfigured footprint in the garage raised suspicions. Though poorly defined, it clearly belonged to someone who had been at the scene right after the shooting. However, the heavy rains from the previous days had erased many crucial details. Still, the discovery was enough for the police to start paying closer attention to the family members living in the house. As the investigation progressed, new information about the relationship between Anderson and Flordelis began to surface. Although the couple was publicly seen as a model of unity, behind closed doors, there were secrets few knew about. Witnesses claimed that in the months before his death, Anderson had seemed paranoid, as if he sensed something was coming. He avoided certain family members, and in conversations with close friends, he even mentioned fearing for his life. These accounts raised red flags for the investigators. If Anderson suspected something might happen, why didn't he act sooner? And, more importantly, who was he afraid of? Text messages began to emerge, showing a tense relationship between Anderson and some of his children. There were arguments, veiled accusations, and even indirect threats. But what was behind all this tension? Flordelis' family, with its dozens of adopted children, quickly became the focus of the investigation. Lucas, who was already in jail, was mentioned in several intercepted conversations. It seemed that he was involved in something bigger than the police had initially imagined. But the most shocking discovery was an earlier plot to poison Anderson, an unsuccessful attempt that only heightened suspicions that the crime had been premeditated. Clues continued to surface, but the truth still felt distant. Every time the investigators thought they were close to an answer, a new twist would complicate the case even further. Flordelis, in interviews, maintained her victim stance. She cried in public, denied any involvement, and called for justice. But behind the scenes, the evidence against her was piling up. With so many conflicting pieces of evidence, one question began to rise. Who was really behind Anderson's murder? Could it be that the woman who preached love and faith was the mastermind behind it all? What the investigators discovered next would shock even the most skeptical. The web of suspects within the family. As the investigation progressed, the police began to dismantle the public image of Flordelis and her family. What was once seen as a house filled with love and faith, with dozens of adopted children, now seemed like a complex web of intrigues and dark secrets. Among the children, two names started to draw more attention: Flavio and Lucas, both directly linked to the crime. Flavio, Flordelis' biological son, was the first to raise suspicion. His behavior during the interrogations was evasive and cold, as if he were hiding something. More than that, an analysis of the weapons found in the house revealed that the pistol used in the murder was directly connected to him. For the police, this was the first confirmation that the crime wasn't the work of outsiders, but rather someone within the family. Lucas, on the other hand, was already in prison for involvement in drug trafficking. Initially, this seemed like just a coincidence, but a crucial discovery changed everything. Text messages revealed conversations between Lucas and Flavio in the days leading up to the crime, suggesting that there was more behind Anderson's death than the police initially thought. It became evident that the relationship between the two brothers was central to the plot. But who was the real mastermind? By this point, the investigation pointed to a family conspiracy, something that shocked Brazilian society. How could two sons be involved in such a brutal plan against their own adoptive father? And even more disturbing, how much did Flordelis know or was involved? Intercepted conversations suggested that she wasn't oblivious to what was happening in her own home. But there was something even more disturbing. Among the dozens of messages and clues, a revelation was about to come to light. The relationship between Flordelis and Anderson wasn't what everyone thought, and this would completely change the course of the investigation. Flordelis, who had once been seen as the caring mother and devoted pastor, began to take center stage in the case. Witnesses claimed that her relationship with Anderson had deteriorated in the months leading up to his death. The arguments had become more frequent, and there were rumors that she had been looking for ways to get rid of her husband. This new scenario added an even darker tone to the investigation. The profiles of the suspects started to become clearer. Flavio, with his explosive temper, seemed to have been the one who carried out the execution. Lucas, with his criminal connections, might have been the intermediary. But who was at the top of the pyramid? Who had orchestrated Anderson's murder? By this point, the investigators had their suspicions, but needed solid evidence to take the next step. With Flavio and Lucas at the center of suspicion, the police knew they were dealing with something much bigger than an isolated crime. But there was an even more shocking twist to come, something that directly linked Flordelis to the crime and would change the fate of everyone involved. Stay tuned to find out what was revealed next. The twist, the secret plan to kill Anderson. Just when it seemed like the investigation had reached its limit, a new witness came forward. One of Flordelis' adopted children, who had remained silent until then, decided to speak. What he revealed completely changed the perception of the crime. There had been a premeditated plan to kill Anderson do Carmo, and this plan involved not just Flavio and Lucas, but also other family members. And the most shocking part, it had been in the works for months before the murder. In his statement, the son described secret meetings held inside the house, where the children discussed ways to get rid of Anderson. Initially, they tried to poison him. Small doses of poison were put into his food, but the pastor survived every attempt. Frustration grew, and with it, the desperation to find a final solution. That's when the idea to shoot him was put into action. What this witness revealed was only the beginning. In the days that followed, irrefutable evidence would surface, directly linking Flordelis to the murder plot. Text messages were analyzed more closely, and it was discovered that Flordelis was far more involved than she had let on. Some of the messages suggested that she encouraged her children to finish off her husband, claiming that he had become an obstacle in her plans. For the investigators, this was the missing piece to complete the puzzle. Flordelis, the woman who publicly wept for her husband's death, was in fact at the center of a family conspiracy to kill him. But what could have driven a mother and pastor, a respected figure in her community, to orchestrate such a brutal crime? For the police, the answer lay in the power dynamics within the family. Anderson wasn't just Flordelis' gay husband. He was the controller of the family's finances and managed both their public and personal lives. Some family members felt he had become an oppressive figure, and Flordelis, who had once depended on him to build her image, now saw him as a threat to her interests. The confession of this witness shed light on what was really happening behind closed doors. The plan to kill Anderson wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment idea from disgruntled children. It was a conspiracy that had been brewing for months, with several failed attempts before the final, deadly act. This twist in the case completely shifted the investigation's focus, making Flordelis the prime suspect as the mastermind behind the crime. Now, with confirmation that the murder was premeditated, the police needed definitive proof to put Flordelis behind bars. The discoveries in the following days would be decisive for the case. But there was still one more revelation to come. Something the police would find in one of Flordelis' private conversations that would cement her guilt. A secret that would change everything. Stay tuned to find out how this final piece was uncovered and how it sealed Flordelis' fate. The fall of Flordelis, the pastor's arrest. With the revelations about the murder plot and her children's involvement, investigators became increasingly convinced that Flordelis was not just a passive figure in the scheme, but the mastermind behind it all. The remaining question was, how to prove it definitively. Then, a new discovery made through the analysis of the family's cell phones provided the evidence needed to directly link Flordelis to the crime. In messages sent to her children, Flordelis appeared to be coordinating the details of the plan to kill Anderson. She mentioned that he needed to be eliminated so that things could go back to normal. There was no more doubt. The pastor, who had been seen as a figure of faith and dedication, had transformed into a cold, calculating manipulator, willing to do anything to maintain control over her life and public image. From that moment on, investigators focused their attention on how to arrest Flordelis, who still enjoyed parliamentary immunity as a federal congresswoman. However, the weight of the accumulating evidence began to put pressure on the authorities. The entire country was following the case, and the downfall of Flordelis, once considered untouchable, seemed increasingly imminent. What was about to happen would shock not just the evangelical community, but the entire country. The woman who preached the word of God was about to become a tragic example of how power and ambition can corrupt. On August 24, 2020, Flordelis was officially charged as the mastermind behind Anderson Carmo's murder. Her arrest sent shockwaves through the media and among her followers. Many still believed in her innocence, but the evidence was overwhelming. She was removed from her position and her parliamentary immunity was revoked, clearing the way for her imprisonment. And now that the pieces are starting to fall into place, you won't want to miss the next chapters of this shocking case. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep following this incredible story. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update about this or other intriguing cases we investigate here. How would you feel seeing such an admired public figure being accused of something so terrible? A sense of betrayal spread through the community. Would you still believe in her, or was the evidence enough to change your mind? Despite the overwhelming evidence, Flordelis continued to deny her involvement, claiming that she was the target of a conspiracy to destroy her reputation. During interviews, she cried, insisting that she loved Anderson and would never have planned his death. But for investigators, the evidence was undeniable. Flordelis' arrest was the culmination of a long and exhaustive investigation. For many, it was difficult to accept that a woman who preached love and charity could be capable of orchestrating the murder of her own husband. However, the details of the case revealed a much more complex side to her personality, a woman willing to do whatever it took to protect her interests and maintain control over her life and image. But what was left now was the trial. Would Flordelis be convicted, or was there still a chance for her innocence to be proven? What was about to happen in court would surprise everyone, bringing yet another twist to the case. Don't miss the final outcome of this story, the trial and its consequences. With Flordelis' arrest, the country anxiously awaited the trial that would determine her fate. The evidence against her was overwhelming, but like in any high-profile crime case, the verdict was far from predictable. The trial began in November 2021, and for weeks, the courtroom became the stage for an intense battle between the defense and the prosecution. On one side, the prosecution presented a strong case: the text messages, the testimonies from her children, and the failed poisoning attempts. All of this painted a picture of Flordelis as the mastermind behind a cold, calculated crime. On the other side, the defense argued that Flordelis had been manipulated by family members, particularly by Flavio and Lucas, who they claimed had planned the crime without her knowledge. The defense insisted that she was a victim of the circumstances, used as a scapegoat. However, there was one last revelation that would change the course of the trial, something that would bring to light secrets that many had hoped would stay hidden. In the courtroom, the testimonies were emotional and intense. Some of Flordelis' children defended her, stating that she could never have done such a thing. Others, however, revealed disturbing stories of manipulation, psychological abuse, and even sexual abuse within the home. What once appeared to be a family united by faith and charity now showed itself to be a toxic structure, corroded by dark secrets. Witnesses spoke of how Anderson controlled the family's finances, leading to constant tensions between him and Flordelis. The image of perfection the family projected in public crumbled with each new testimony. As the trial progressed, it became clear that even if Flordelis hadn't pulled the trigger, her influence over her children and involvement in the discussions about Anderson's death were undeniable. The prosecution argued that she had used her position of power within the family to convince her children to carry out the plan, while she remained seemingly untouched on the surface. On November 13, 2021, after weeks of testimony and heated debates, Flordelis was sentenced to 50 years in prison for the murder of Anderson du Carmo. The sentence was met with shock by many of her followers, who had believed in her innocence until the very end. For others, it was the expected outcome of a plot that seemed straight out of a suspense movie, but tragically real. Years after the trial, the city of Niterói still lives in the shadow of what happened that fateful night in 2019. Flordelis' case wasn't just about a murder. It was a grim portrait of how far ambition, power, and the desire for control can drive someone. But this wasn't the only case to shake the community. In our next video, we will explore another shocking crime, where power and religion once again intersect in an unexpected and dramatic conclusion.